Hello, and welcome to Sinful Arts Fantasy Fridays. I'm your host, Cynthia, and we are reading The Hobbit, Chapter 1, Episode 3. And off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had become a throng. Some called for ale, and some for porter, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes. So the Hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had been set on the hearth, the seed cakes were gone, and the dwarves were starting on a round of buttered scones, when there came a loud knock, not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the Hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry and altogether bewildered and beweathered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarves, 4 more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark that he had put there the morning before. "Carefully, carefully," he said. "It is not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat and then open the door like a popgun. Let me introduce Bilfor, Bombur, and especially Thorin." "At your service," said Bilfor, Bombur, and standing in a row. They hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf, in fact no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat, with Bilfor, Bofur, and Bombur on top of him. One thing, Bombur was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin, indeed, was very haughty and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. "We are all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there's something left for the latecomers to eat and drink." "What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and an apple tart," said Bilfor. "And mince pies and cheese," said Bofur. "And a pork pie and salad," said Bombur. "And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarves through the door. "Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow," Gandalf called at him, as the Hobbit stumped off to the pantry. "And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles. Seems to know as much about the inside of my larders as I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had got all of the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. "Confusicate and be bothered, these dwarves," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand?" Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dolwyn at the door of the kitchen, and Fili and Kili behind them. Before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of the small tables into the parlor, and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarves ate and talked, and time went on. At last they pushed their chairs back. Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose you will all stay to supper," he said in his politest, unexpressing tones. "Of course," said Thorin. "After all, we shan't go through the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now to clear up." Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet, and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on top with one hand. While the hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking with fright, "Please be careful! Please don't trouble! I can manage!" But the dwarves were already starting to sing. "Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggin hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl. Pound them up with thumping pole. And when you've finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. And that's what Bilbo Baggins hates, so carefully, carefully with the plates." And of course they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away in a safe quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and round in the middle of the kitchen, trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and forth and found Thorin, with his feet on the fender, smoking pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and whatever he told one to go, it went up the chimney, or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had quite a cloud of them about him already. In the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill. "Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments." Killy and Filly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dori and Nori and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bombur produced a drum from the hall. Bilfur and Bolfur went out too, and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dalwyn and Balwyn said, "Excuse me, I left mine in the porch. Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with viols as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was his beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into the dark lands under a strange moon, far over the water and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from a little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and they still played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on, and suddenly the first one, and then another, began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes, and like this, like a firmament of their song, it can be like their song without their music. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of The Hobbit. Join me next week when we get to hear the dwarves' song. If you would like to show your support for this channel, go check out Cynfullarts.ca or check out my Ko-fi page. Any purchases from my store or donations to my Ko-fi page are greatly appreciated. If you have any story suggestions or would like me to read an anonymous story, email me at info@cynfullarts.ca and maybe your story will be featured. Don't forget to smash that like button and to subscribe to keep hearing more stories from Cynful Arts. And if you're on TikTok, go check me out at Resin Girl. We also have an Instagram page as well as a Facebook page, so go check us out on the platforms that you use. And see you next week for the next part in our series.